Inside the world of Bridgerton, author and Regency period expert Curzon explains the historic inspirations behind the hit series and what life really was like in Regency high society. Delighted to be joining me live on the line, author of Inside the World of Bridgerton, Curzon. Curzon, good morning to you.
Good morning. Hello.
It's a TV series that has really captured the nation, isn't it?
Oh, it really has, hasn't it? All over the world as well.
So tell me a little bit about, because Regency. So for those of us who aren't the worst kind of people in the world, basically armchair historians, then tell me what period we're talking about this. Are we talking, as George III, before then, after then? What period are we talking, please?
We're talking it's during George III. It's 1811 to 1820. And George III was still alive, but obviously he had his very well publicised mental health difficulties, which meant he couldn't rule anymore. So he handed over the power to his son, the Prince of Wales, who became the Prince Regent. And he was a pleasure seeker and a bon vivant and a kind of thoroughly bad lot, a real rogue.
And it's a period that perhaps that recently, because we maybe 5-10 years ago, it was all Tudors and Renaissance and that sort of, and lots of ripping bodices. But this is, as you said, it is a time of Brighton Pavilion, etc. And continental fashions.
Yes, it is. And it's a time that people are probably more familiar with than they think, even if they're not historians, because, of course, it's Jane Austen's era. So it kind of comes and goes. As you say, the Tudors were big, but every so often we have a new Pride and Prejudice or a new Regency, bodice ripper. And this is that. And, yeah, it's a time of real splendour. It's a time of the world changing, fashions changing, and it's a time when glamour and glitz were, real social currency.
Also, social currency seemed to be, an awful lot of the novels of the period seem to be about finding a husband, getting a good marriage, and the intrigue and sort of dinners and rushing around the various country houses, trying to find your own Mr. Darcy, if you like.
Yes. If you were a woman in the Regency, you, upper class one particularly, sorry to say, but you really were considered a little bit strange if you didn't bag yourself a husband. And to get a husband, they had what they called the season, which was a period in London. It was a few months in London when Parliament was sitting, so all the lords were there. And you would present your daughter. She would come to Queen Charlotte's ball and she would meet the Queen. And this would mean she was officially out, and that meant she was ready for marriage. And you would present your daughter. She would go dancing. She would be there to charm all the eligible bachelors. And the sad thing is, if she didn't catch a husband in her first season, she came back year after year. And as each year passed, she became less marriageable. So it was a really, a little bit of a cattle market. But on the other side, of course, there were plenty of men looking for wives as well, because they were looking for a good dowry, a well-connected bride, a title. So on both sides, there was a lot of, it was a lot of business as well as love going on.
And it must have been a really high pressure situation then. That first your first Queen Charlotte's ball. I mean, the stakes were very high indeed.
They were absolutely enormous, and because gossip and social cachet in their upper classes was so rife, this is something Bridgerton's really captured. Everybody was watching everybody else, waiting, kind of hoping that the most eligible bachelor would look at them, or that, the girl with the best dowry and the richest dad might make a little slip up. Because this was a time where if you damaged your reputation, if you were a woman, it was done forever. You were finished. So the pressure was really on, not only to behave in a way that, if you think about almost like every camera on you nowadays, every eye is looking at you, waiting for you to put a foot wrong, seeing what you did. And you've got this one chance to really meet this massive pressure and come out, if you like, at the front of the stage with everybody wanting you.
One of my favourite authors, one of my favourite novels of the period is Vanity Fair, William Makepeace Thackeray, and it really does capture, doesn't it, the labyrinthine, scheming and again the outings. I mean, Box Hill was an outing for the day, and everything seems to be. I mean, it is almost like walking across a social minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's a really nice way of putting it. And there were so many strange little points of protocol and rules that I think if we were to go back to that time now, in many ways we would recognize it. But in many other ways, it would be absolutely baffling. And, there were so many strange little rules. So if you went dancing and you danced with a man once, that was great. That was perfectly normal. If you danced with him twice at the same dance, it suggested you were close. And if you danced with him 3 times, essentially it told everybody something's going on here. So something as, to us, innocent as that came with so many different meanings and layers. If you were dancing with a man 3 times and there was nothing official between you, your mother would be absolutely horrified.
We're talking about the sort of glittering occasions, and Bridgerton has also won plaudits for the fashion. Now, I'm very partial, being a bloke, to a waistcoat, but so this is I'm not so sort of up with the big sort of fluffy collars and whatever, but fashion at the time. I mean, daring. I think we have to admit, wouldn't we?
Oh yes, very daring. So fashion at the time, I think a lot of people, when they think of the 18th century, you think of those big wide dresses. I have a Twitter account where I do a lot of historical fashion, and we have some dresses that are literally 6 foot out either side. But obviously then the French Revolution came around and everybody got a little bit worried because everyone in France that had been opulent and, conspicuous displays of wealth were either dead, exiled, ruined, And in England, people went, maybe we shouldn't be showing off these ostentatious displays of huge gowns and wigs. So they went with a fashion popularized by Empress Josephine over in France, and she favored what we would recognize as the Empire line, which is that, that famous column dress kind of with the high waist up under the boobs. And compared to what had gone before, suddenly you could see the female shape. So obviously you could see her bust, you could see where her hips and her waist were. It was very, very daring by the standards of what had gone before. And this is why people that watch Bridgerton will see Queen Charlotte in particular looks very out of date. She's got enormous dresses and powdered wigs. Because in reality, she was an older woman and she hated new fashion. She banned feathers in hair at court and all this kind of thing. Because she wanted to keep things, almost like today where you say, skirts are a bit short or whatever. She thought dresses were a bit too revealing. But at the time, you were stepping out. You wanted to, it sounds awful, sort of show yourself off, show off your goods. And what better way to do it than in, a linen column dress that kind of accentuates all the good bits and maybe hides the bits that you don't want everybody to see as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned that whole thing with the French Revolution, and we've got the American War of Independence as well. I mean, it's all very sort of glittery and racing around the country in parties. But it was, there was a time of worry for the upper classes because, many people had seen their, family and friends meet very sticky ends over in France.
Yeah, and again, that applies to the Queen. She never met Marie Antoinette, but Queen Charlotte was kind of pen pals with Marie Antoinette because they had quite similar situations. They both married as teenagers, and they both come from quite sheltered backgrounds into, really wealthy, glittering courts. And she would write to the Queen, and when things started to go horribly wrong, Queen Charlotte, who was George III's wife, would send parcels of clothes and, little books and trinkets. But what she didn't do was ever offer to take the royal family in, because obviously there's that point at which, I think people kind of don't want to get involved, sadly. And in England, because the Prince Regent was seen as behaving so appallingly, there was poverty, people were starving, And he was giving 19-course banquets. He treated himself to a 4,000-piece set of silver, kind of silver. It's called the Grand Service. It's plates, it's teapots, it's everything you can think of. And somebody daubed bread or the regent's head on the wall of his palace. People threw stones at him. So it was a time when England came pretty close, the upper classes thought, to revolution. But although they tried to avoid conspicuous consumption in some ways, they had to tread that line of not being seen to flaunt what they had, whilst in their own set, making it really clear that they had it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If you had money, you didn't want to go out in a 6-foot dress or whatever, but you wanted people, when you went to the assembly rooms or the ballrooms, you wanted people to say, oh, there's Lady So-and-so in the family diamonds. And it was a really fine line.
Yeah, as we said before, it was a real social minefield. And you say there are certain things that we'd recognise if we went back today. Obviously, this is believe it or not, this is in an age before influencers, but the media at this time really explodes, and so does independent writing, and so does coffee house culture and pamphlets and all this sort of thing. So, we talk about, haters gonna hate, etc. And this was this is if you like a pre-social media social media.
It is, and it's before influencers as we know them. But the Georgians and the Regency period, actually, they did have their influences of a sort. There was a lady named Kitty Fisher, and she was a little earlier. She was in the mid-18th century, 1740s, 1760s. And she was a courtesan, and she had the most famous and wealthy men amongst her clients. She was the lady that Casanova claimed ate banknotes in sandwiches. And she was what we really would recognize now as an influencer. So there was an incident when she fell off her horse and flashed people. She wasn't obviously wearing any undies. And it became celebrated across Europe. People sold prints and pictures and, as you say, pamphlets and poems, and would make up the fact that they had been there when she fell off because it was a thing to tell people. And she pamphleted expensive clubs and wealthy men and sent them letters basically saying, this is what I can do for you, so why don't you make me an offer? So it was a time when people really understood how to work the media. And the media as well got away with things that our media absolutely would not. They would print really scurrilous stories about the regent and his set and his many, many mistresses, and they would refer to them in code. So they would say something, an illustrious gentleman in the royal box. Well, everybody knew who it was. Or if they wanted to put a rumour about the Duke of Clarence, say, they would just put the D of C. So it didn't take, a genius to work out who they were referring to. And I think we have this image of the past being quite a polite place, but the Georgians and the Regency, the media were, far from it.
That's those bleeding Victorians airbrushing everything. That's what that is.
Yeah. It is. Don't get me on it.
One of the things that has raised eyebrows is the multiracial aspect of Bridgerton. People are going, well, that never happened. This is, and I'm going to drop the W word on you here. That's wokeness gone mad, Catherine.
Wokeness gone mad. I think it's something like Bridgerton. The way I always kind of look at it is it's like a fantasia of history. So it's set when it's set. There are people in it that are real people, but there are lots of things in it, obviously, that aren't necessarily historically accurate. And obviously, the diversity amongst the upper classes isn't. I know it's been like a really hot potato, and it is, I think, one of those things that will run and run.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I do always kind of describe it as a fantasia, that it's old history, really, in many ways. Lots of things happen in Bridgerton that would, just didn't happen. Yeah. Even things like the dress fabrics are all over the place. But,
well, for comfort, if nothing else, for the cast, surely, because I mean, some of the outfits must have been absolutely, to wear.
Well, they shouldn't have been. And this is one of those corset myths. And I think, there's been, I'm sure you've seen in the press lately, there's been a huge amount of debate about the corsets are hurting the actresses, and Netflix are going to supposedly ban the corset. And I've actually been asked a lot about this recently. And in reality, at that era, your underwear didn't hurt. When we think of those corsets, you're thinking of the Victorian, tight lacing and Scarlett O'Hara grabbing the bedposts and being, but in the Regency, they wore something called stays, which were, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a long line bra.
Oh, frequently. I mean, obviously, I was only gazing across the dressing mirror this morning as I was putting it in.
You were. Yes. So it's more like a long line bra. So it's intended to sort of lift up your boobs and separate them. Well, not your boobs, obviously.
Let's not go there, please. It's some people haven't finished their first coffee.
Give you a nice bit of posture as opposed to sucking you in. A small, tiny waist in the Regency era wasn't fashionable. The dress wouldn't show it off.
Yeah.
So if the corsets are hurting the actresses, it's because the corsets don't fit. It's either that, or it's because Netflix know it'll get lots of column inches to talk about it.
Here's the thing, which you just said that, because again, body. I mean, this is a 21st century thing, but body image. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about race, and there were people of colour around in the UK at that time. It wasn't, it wasn't. But body image, because if you look at the paintings of Constable or Turner or anything around that time, if there are, the idea of feminine beauty, it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't pumped lips and whatever else, was it?
No, it was, the Regency really liked a natural look. So they responded, just as it pushed back against the fashion of previous eras, it pushed back against that really over-made up look that you might think, the kind of white face and the red lips and the beauty marks. And so they pushed back against that because what they wanted to see was natural beauty. It went with that natural shape, natural hair. And it was a product of the Age of Enlightenment when people went off around Europe and they visited classical sites. And they saw, what they saw, simplicity in classical things, which was natural, lots of natural things. There's quite an interesting story. There's an actress named Elizabeth Farron who was a Regency superstar. And she had her portrait painted by Thomas Lawrence in the 1790s. And when she saw it, she was horrified because she said he'd made her too slim.
Ooh.
Yes, and she asked him to plump it up a bit because she didn't want to look like someone who couldn't afford food. Because obviously, conspicuous gluttony, like the Prince of Wales, was a sign of immense wealth. And she wanted to look like she could afford to feed herself. So she asked Lawrence to add a few pounds on, make her look more rounded than she was.
So it wasn't so much Photoshop, it was Paintoshop, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It was a little bit of early Paintoshop.
I like what you said about the fact that it was more natural, because if you think back to the court of Louis XIV and everything that gets rejected against him, for men, I mean, white face, absolutely, a little bit of makeup, the huge wigs and all that priming and puffing around.
Yeah. It was completely rejected by this point. As I say, except by Queen Charlotte, who forced it at court. She wasn't too bothered with the makeup. She wanted the wig, so she wanted the dress. But I think with that's almost like if you think of people who still dress in the way they dressed when it was, they were in the prime of their life, if you like.
Yeah, you're talking to one right now, to be honest with you, but there you go, yes.
So she had a little bit of that. So you would still see hints of that, but it would usually be someone older, whether it was an older man wearing his wig and his breeches or an older woman with her makeup and a slightly out of fashion dress. But yeah, it was a real reaction against, I think, people saying, oh, I don't want to look like my mum and I don't want to look like my granddad. And to us now, obviously, it looks terribly, terribly ornate even to us. But then it was like kind of shocking, like, my goodness, this is suddenly so casual when we're going out like that.
Without a wig? How can you possibly go out without a wig?
You're going off showing your hair.
What did you use as a starting point then for Inside the Word of Bridgerton? Because you've got to start, otherwise you can't just have a sort of a scattergun approach, can you? So what?
Oh no.
So where did you kind of start? Did you obviously you have a knowledge of the period before you delve into a book like this?
Yeah, I've written quite a lot of books about the 18th century. I've written a lot of biographies of the kings and queens of the era as well. So it's a world that I know pretty well. I do know quite well. I'm trying to be modest, but I hope I know it because I've written a lot of books about it. And my approach was to essentially go through it a topic at a time, because I thought that way, as a reader, sometimes you kind of want to go read about fashion or the media or medical horror stories. So it was just a question in my head of thinking, what topics interest me? What topics do I know from my social media that people always ask me about? And really just tackling each one as its own little article, if you like, that really takes you through the story of someone in the Regency, from their education all the way through to their marriage, getting older, becoming widowed maybe, before they're having children, health problems they might face, and really the world that they would move through. So I just wanted to tell the story in a way that someone that's not super into history, but really, Bridgerton or Jane Austen has really captured them, could read it and understand more about what they're seeing on screen away from that fiction. But, we all watch things and we think, oh, that's quite interesting. And that's what this is. It's intended to be a kind of primer and a guidebook to Regency England. So if you ever get in the TARDIS and go back in time, you can flick through it and know where you need to be and what you need to be doing.
And I suppose the good thing is, Bridgerton has sort of stirred an interest in this period, and hopefully people will use it as a springboard in. I'm just laughing because I famously remember there was a film out called A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, and it was a big...
I remember it.
You remember exactly, Heath Ledger. And the thing was, I had some people who then went out and bought the works of Chaucer, thinking that A Knight's Tale was an accurate representation of the 12th century writing, and were very disappointed with it. It wasn't, it wasn't actually the film A Knight's Tale.
Yeah, I think you would be. I think you're going to see quite a difference there, actually. But I think that's the good thing with Bridgerton, is that Bridgerton captures this, it's got lots of fantasias in it, it's got lots of fiction, but it does really capture that sense of kind of excitement and gossip and glitter. And I think if you were to maybe read some Jane Austen or something like that, you will recognise a very similar world to that, but obviously this is a 21st century version of that, with all the 21st century trappings that people who watch Netflix really want.
The book is called Inside the World of Bridgerton, True Stories of Regency High Society. It's by Catherine Curzon, who've been speaking to you today. Catherine, if people want to investigate the world of Bridgerton and find out so much more, where can they go?
They can go to my website, which is catherinecurzon.com, or they can find me on Twitter as Madame Gilflet, or by my hashtag, which is frocking fabulous.
Okay, Madame Gilfret. I can't leave you with that one. Madame Gilfret, tell me more.
Gilflet is a bit of 18th century slang, and it means a coquettish minx or a mischievous woman. So that's why I went with that. But obviously, if you search for Catherine Curzon, you'll find me.
I absolutely love that. Go forth and find Catherine Curzon on any social media. The book is called Inside the World of Bridgerton, True Stories of Regency High Society. It will also be available as a virtual download from our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Inside the World of Bridgerton. It's by Catherine Curzon. Catherine, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It was great fun. Thank you.